welcome back. This is Jeff Brickler. Welcome back to the Integrate Intelligent podcast, hosted by me, Jeff Brickler, and my brother and CEO and founder of CAD, Scott Brickler. Scott, no new guests this week. I am back as well. I missed one episode, I think, while I was on vacation with my family, but great to be back, I think, for a second week in a row. And again, to be here with you, talking about all things engineering, manufacturing. And so again, great to see you again.
Good to see you too, Jeff, man. I will see a tan from that vacation though. Where's the tan?
No tan. This body does not tan. I gotta be careful on my, I gotta wear a hat all the time. Otherwise my bald head gets burned. I gotta, no tans, no tans. I mean, it was really hot in Florida. I was in Orlando, obviously, with my family and Disney. And I think the heat index was 104. It was terribly hot. But no, I gotta shun the heat. I gotta have an umbrella just in the sun. It's crazy. So,
well, at least you still have most of your hair left. I mean, you can see mine is shining pretty good here, so there's not much left.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for watching. The Integrate Intelligently podcast. Scott and I, we had a cute. Returned this episode to more educational content around kind of this industry, what I often call the alphabet soup. Lots of acronyms in here. Last week we talked about CAD or CAD systems. Not last week, but a couple weeks ago, we talked about those systems, what they do from an engineering and manufacturing perspective. And then this week we're really working on PLM, another acronym in the manufacturing and the engineering space. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about what PLM is, what kind of companies use it, the value of a PLM, the different types of PLMs out there, how CADTALK, how I've come into contact with PLM and where PLM fits in kind of the ecosystem of an engineering and manufacturing company. Anything else to add to what you want to cover with PLM today, Scott?
No, I'm really excited about the topic. I mean, I think it's as this world has grown over the years, and just throughout my career, PLM is probably the newest acronym on the block, I would say, as far as things that people talk about, and it's very exciting about how these things are expanding. How the manufacturing and the engineering world have kind of are getting more and more. The bridge between the two, or those two worlds, are kind of coming together more and more. So, really excited about this topic today.
PLM, Product Lifecycle Management. That's the definition in terms. That's what the acronym means. So, in my experience with PLM is not something that I knew about when I first came to CADTALK 10 years ago. Of course, I didn't know anything about manufacturing, and of course, knowing CADTALK, our primary focus when I first started was with CAD systems. But PLM has certainly been on the market for a number of years, well over 20 years, I think probably 30 or 40 years now, that PLM has been a part of the market and that product lifecycle management. So in my experience, product lifecycle management is different, but connected to CAD systems and PDM and vaulting systems. So my experience with PLM systems are really designed for managing long lifecycle products. Well, not like long lifecycle, but maybe like yearly products, or managing a product over time. Very different from its goal as an ERP. What about your thoughts, Scott? Is that what you come to understand with PLM?
Yeah, it's like we typically see PLMs, and you think you said this already, but on companies who create something like a model year type of situation, long lifetime type of, think about lifecycle management, you're managing the lifecycle of a product. So you see PLMs a lot more in like automotive or in like consumer electronics, like a cell phone, something that you have every couple of years you change the cell phone, or every couple of years you change the model of the car, where they have these really long life cycles. There's you see a lot around like medical device and compliance, but there's a lot of like management around creation, not just the creation of that product, but all of the other infrastructure and documentation around it and how you're going to handle it, things like that. Whereas opposed to what we started, which is more engineer to order type companies where you're literally creating new designs all the time, was where kind of CADTALK started. it's a little bit different because like you might not be creating as many designs, but there's much more overhead around the design that you're creating in this world.
So it sounds like I think your background and this kind of start of CADTALK, at least the original idea, was around this engineering to order space, right? This area where you wouldn't manage a life cycle, and probably I suspect when you came up with the idea of CADTALK, you didn't know about PLM.
No, I mean, it's definitely newer to me. I mean, just from my background, right? I mean, we obviously hear about it in the industry quite a bit. It's like, I think these things exist somewhat on a spectrum, right? So, I mean, if you're completely engineered to order, it probably wouldn't do you. I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but just my experience has been that you wouldn't typically have PLM because by the time you got everything kind of into PLM and documented, you already move on to the next design. It's a one-off type thing. So you still have documentation around what you did, but generally what you've already created from a drawings perspective and stuff like that is enough. And but then you might move into where you're actually creating like aftermarket parts for those things. Even though they're engineered to order, you're still creating aftermarket parts. You do have a life cycle to it. So there's still, and then there's a whole other aspect where you're, like I mentioned earlier about the model year, where you're creating a cell phone or you're creating or like a medical device where the life cycle is really long. And all of that stuff around that is much more intense as far as keeping track of that and knowing what's going on and really managing that life cycle. So I think there's definitely a spectrum of that. I think maybe true engineer to order be on one side, and then this kind of model year life cycle, large life cycle items will be on the other. And PLM can serve a lot of that spectrum. It just depends on where it makes sense. But it's since I came from ETO, we didn't use PLM. I didn't personally use it because we were very engineered to order from the manufacturing companies that I worked with earlier on.
So how is PLM connected to engineering at all? Like how is it connected? What?
Yeah, I think the way I've kind of thought about this a lot lately is that CADTALK has always been kind of the bridge between the engineering and the manufacturing. When you think about the manufacturing being in the ERP world, the actual manufacturing and the work around that's in the ERP side, and the engineering world is kind of CAD and PDM and things like that. And I think of PLM as being kind of like another piece in the middle there. So it's like I think it's closer to manufacturing than straight CAD is, right? So it's like it's worrying more about some of the other things around CAD and the design than just the design. So typically, just like in CADTALK world, a CAD design or an engineering design might feed into the manufacturing system, the ERP. You also have the CAD feeding into the PLM. And PLM is definitely more focused around some of those product areas than maybe the ERP is. So you see a lot of times you'll see ECO process, engineering change processes inside of PLMs. You'll see more about supplier type of things because we're supplier compliance and where you buy things is really, really important. There are those same features sometimes in the ERP, but it just depends if the ERP is really focused towards that. So there are some overlaps between functionality and PLM functionality, but PLM tends to be more focused and more broad. I mean, more focused and feature rich, not broad, but feature rich in those areas that they support.
So CAD and PLM aren't they're linked together, right? They're brought together in a lot of ways because the PLM is going to be managing those designs. As I always heard it when I worked with PLM companies and I talked to them, but PLM always sees themselves as like the source of truth, right? Because a product, think about, I guess first let's back up a bit. What kinds of products would use a PLM that we use every day? I think you mentioned, I assume you said cell phone. So I assume any kind of device that we're using, computer, cell phone, has a PLM
cars.
at the back end of it.
Yeah, cars.
Cars, yeah. Medical
anything,
devices, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, medical devices. Anything that's like you design it and then you design it and you might not change the design you're not changing the design every time you sell it. You're doing more. You're coming up with a design. You spend a lot of time making that design, and then you might sell a large quantity of those products with that design. That's typically where PLMs come along, and especially around compliance. Compliance is a big one. Medical devices being one I can think of right off the bat. And the other thing I would add on to what you said about that too is like the source of truth. But like the CAD is a lot of these things. When I think about like the engineering design is like the genesis of the thing, and then the PLM data and the ERP data are derivatives of that.
Right.
So it's like, so you think about like it starts here, it starts as this design, the engineer's intent, and then we add more, so we derive more information from that. Where are we going to buy it? Where are the compliance? What's going on with this? What process are we going to do? And then you have even more more derivative of that in the ERP world of like, this is where this is how we're going to make it. This is how we're going to cost it. This is how we're going to do all the other stuff. So the source of truth is like always a controversial one. Is everybody wants to have one source of truth, but it really depends on what the data is, if it's a source of truth. So you could say, well, where's the source of truth for the design? It's in the CAD. Where's the source of truth for compliance and other information? PLM. Where's the source of truth for how we're going to make it? It's probably ERP. So it depends on what the data is. But the I would say the derivation or the derivative data is always the design, the engineering design, because that's where it starts, right? So that's the derivative
Right.
data. And then so the source of truth is always, it depends on what you're talking about. What truth are you
This is
talking
like an
about?
evolution, right? Like an
Yeah.
evolution where you start off with the design, and then that goes to the next stage in the evolution of that product, that bill of material, and then to ERP to yet another evolution of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And each part has its own role to play, and all very valuable roles to play, but play slightly different roles, but have shared data, right? So
Mm.
because you're beginning in engineering and the design, then that gets passed on to PLM, which then has maybe additional information, like you said, supplier compliance, maybe quality compliance, right? Quality measures, engineering change process in terms of how we're going to manage and change this bill of material. But then when you get to manufacturing, it's very specific into where am I going to manufacture this? What if I have multiple sites? What material am I going to use? What are the routing steps, the operations, procurement, shipping, right? All of that stuff from a manufacturing standpoint.
Mm.
All of those differ. Now, what I always heard was that PLM serves the difference between like someone who would use a PLM and like engineering to order would be this high volume, low mix
Mm.
versus
Yep.
high mix, low volume. So in your world, by your start, where you got the start of integration with CADTALK and where engineering to order was, we had high mix, low volume. What that means is when you were working for that package manufacturer didn't sell one packaging machine 10 million times.
Right.
They sold one. They had a model that was then customized, right, for a
Mm-hmm.
particular customer. That customer might buy 5 or 10 of those machines,
Sure. Yeah.
but after those 5 or 10 were done, like that was it.
Mm-hmm.
That customer may buy more machines, but maybe not that model anymore or that
Yeah.
type of one. They might buy like another type of 5 or 10, but they're different, so they have to be engineered again. That's a high mix. Lots of changes all the time.
Yeah. I mean, and just in different industries. I mean, we always made jokes about this. As a small caveat was that like they settle like General Mills or like Anheuser-Busch and those guys, and even the same machine running the same product would be different. In different like even like it was really interesting because the fact that like when you like the cardboard on this floor of the plant would be slightly different because the humidity on that floor was different. So the machine would actually have
Wow.
different programs and slightly different guys to deal with the fact that the humidity was different on that floor. It was just like that's the level of
Wow.
customization that you get into for these types of things. And you just don't get into that when you're mass producing iPads, right? You just don't have that kind
Right.
of variability. So yeah, it's typically like the engineer to order side is like, you just what you said, it's very high mix. I mean, it's down to that level. And then so if you're so the overhead and the cost of doing a lot of the other things that you do like with medical devices or something you're going to produce a high volume of, you can't afford to do it. So that's why
Right.
PLM doesn't pick up in those areas as much. But when you're doing something, you're like, I'm going to design this and I'm going to make a billion of them or a million of them or whatever it is that you're making, like in the case of like an iPhone or an iPad. You spend a lot more time getting that right, figuring out what you're going to do. Like there's a lot more stuff, and then keeping track of all of that work and this life cycle. How are you going to dispose of the thing? How are you going to recycle it? I mean, all these things are involved in the PLM process. You have a lot more consideration of that when you're doing something that you're going to make a very high volume of, just as you mentioned.
Yeah, and PLMs have a lot of structure around managing that process, right? From an engineering change process, from a workflow, from a place where many people could come together and collaborate on that particular product, right? Because it's not going to be just engineering, because you have, maybe you have labels, or you have quality suppliers, as you mentioned, and all those different people in the organization who need to contribute to that bill of material. And you need that one place where everybody can contribute and add their part of it outside of the manufacturing process, which could be actually, I found that they could be contract manufacturers at sometimes, right? Like, in fact, I think even like probably Samsung and even Apple, probably they design the phones, but they probably outsource the manufacturing to someone else. Right, they could give them that bill of material and tell them, "Hey, this is what you need to use to build this thing, and build millions of them."
Absolutely. I mean, you might see like the design firm, like say like, let's use an example like Apple. Apple doesn't, they might outsource the iPhone just to a manufacturer in China, and that manufacturer probably has their own ERP to run that company, right?
Right.
But maybe Apple has, I don't know for sure, but Apple has a PLM maybe internally for all the designs of how they design the iPad and all of that. And there's some manufacturing concepts, because there is some overlap there. There's some overlap you'll see with, like, there are manufacturing, even operations and things like that in the PLM. But they might, they might not know exactly how that manufacturer is going to make it, but there's some aspects of the manufacturing that need to be specified. Like, just even beyond like tolerances and things like that, because some of these things are very specialized products, and the manufacturing is a part of that design. It really is. So you'd see like that could have been outlined in the PLM side, regardless of what manufacturer is going to make it. That makes sense. A lot of times they single source these things, I believe, but that's kind of the thing that you'll see where, like, the manufacturing, where it's more integral to how it's made is to the thing itself. Then you'd see, like, I think it's another area where you see that kind of back up into the PLM side, because you have to plan that. As opposed to, like, if I'm making a bracket, there's a zillion different ways to make a bracket, but like if I'm making a very specialized piece of technology that goes into the iPad, there's probably only a couple ways to make that thing. And then that needs to be figured out as part of the design and then tracked in a PLM and things like that. So that's kind of where it makes sense to kind of keep track of those types of things, as opposed to like your normal brackets, screws, and nuts and bolts and things like that that are just pretty common.
Right. Yeah. I mean, PLM also often has a quality aspect of it
absolutely,
especially med device, right? You had to have the quality, the compliance, and that quality, and even a lot of regulations around. I'm sure for medical device, and I know probably for the aerospace industry and all of those, a lot of compliance around that system. And what that system does, and the quality workflows and checks and all of that take place in that PLM. And I'm sure that those government regulations require the companies to have those systems in place in order to give that level of confidence to the consumer that these products have gone through a rigorous process, and that way they're going to have the same quality, same parts, same everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just definitely an example of where, like, I think someone was talking about like software eating the world type thing. It's like for every process or system or something that's outside that, in order to make things or do anything, software is now becoming the keeper of that process or data, right? Where it used to be like, we have drawings, and now the drawings are digital. If you have compliance information, it's all stored. So it's like essentially software managing all of these different aspects. And we're finding is, I think PLM is one of those things where it's like, we're finding more and more areas around the manufacturing process that software is now taking control of, or taking and managing, where it used to be maybe more manual or more, in documentation and things like that. You're just seeing more and more niche down areas where software is taking over that process.
So, I mean, it sounds like PLM is going to work in electronics, med device. I would imagine in other industries where it's super critical, like I said, of compliance or safety. Aerospace, defense, heavy, places where you have to, it has to be correct, right? The Boeing 747's got to be right. You got to document, right? Because if something goes wrong, right, and you're going to make a lot of those, even though they're going to make a lot of them, and the quality has to be there, right? You can't like have have a bad day. I'm like, oh, well, I didn't design that part, or didn't, whatever. We didn't follow the process today. It'd be a really bad situation. So anytime you have a situation where the quality has got to be exact every single time, because you're going to make, hundreds or thousands or millions of these, and it's critical, then that PLM makes a huge difference, and it's probably critical to the business.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there are quality modules that stand on their own. There's quality modules that are in ERPs. I think it just really depends on, and there's also ones that are in PLM. I think it just depends on the business that you have and where you're on that spectrum that we mentioned earlier, and where it makes sense for you to use it, and how feature rich is it in each given product, right? I mean, so that's where kind of that decision lies. I think that's one of the things I think. I remember whenever I bought software, and you might have, a lot of times you get like the array of different products, especially in marketing or other different areas. You'll get like 2 products or 3 products and one of them, and they all kind of, some of them have overlapping features, and then some of them they have unique features. And it's almost like it causes a little bit of cognitive dissonance with you when you see something like you already have something, and even the new thing that you're getting ready to look at has a feature that the other one has, and you're like, well, which one should I use for this? Should I use this product or that product? And you get it almost keeps you from buying the other product that you need, because you're like, well, they have a quality module, I don't need a quality module. You get into this whole kind of debate in your mind, and it's just you guys got to think about it like, well, what's the core problem we're trying to solve? And that, yes, these things may have overlap, but you don't have to use them, right? And then just looking at these systems, because every system is going to try to expand the borders of what they do in order to generate more revenue. That's just the way software works, right?
Yeah, that's where software works. Yeah.
So anytime you look at like a software like this, it may not actually need everything about it. You just got to make sure that the piece that really matters to you is what the things they're doing really, really well, and they serve that piece really. Then you can decide of all the array of things that you have where it's best suited to use those pieces or not. So sometimes maybe your quality module in your ERP is the best thing to use, and you just use that. But maybe it's your ERP is just really is really good at scheduling, but the quality is kind of weak. Back it up and use the PLM version. So it's like that's really you got to make those decisions around the array of products that you own. Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a common, working on the sales side and talking to customers and demonstrating and having conversations. A lot of confusion out there, right? Part of it is an alphabet soup, and then it's the customers often come and want recommendations. Obviously, we never recommend anything because of the business we're in. We work with, as a middleware, we're working with so many different systems. But a lot of confusion of like, well, do I need a PLM? Do I need a PDM? Do I need all these, like, again, alphabet soup? Well, what is all this stuff? Do I need all of that? And, and I have some of these, just to your point, I have some of these features over here. Like we have an ERP and it has some of those features. We have a PDM and it has some of those features. And we have this, board or whatever, and Jira, I don't know, we have some of those features. And everybody feels like, well, why do I need another software, another software to do it? I think your wisdom there was really good, is to really think about what's the problem you're trying to solve. Right? What is the thing that when you're looking at a PLM or any software, like when you're looking at it, what is it you're trying to solve? What the problem you're trying to solve? Does that software do it really well? Because every software expands, right? Expands to meet the need of the customer. Because the customer might say, well, especially in the ERP, because the ever-expanding ERP, which is ERP gets a quality module. Why does it get a quality module? Because some company that wants some kind of quality module, who doesn't need a high-level quality process, but needs a little bit. So the ERP wants to make sense. They want to sell their product. Everybody does. We do too at CADTALK. Say, well, I want to sell my product, and I need a bit of a quality module. Well, that quality module might be good for some companies, but won't be the fit for all the companies. And so you have to think about what is it you're trying to achieve, and then really focus on that to pick the right software.
Yeah, I think it's one of the. Not to like go on a tangent about like software selection, but but it comes up a lot with custom. I know with a lot of manufacturing companies that we talk to about like just like you said, like should I have PDM, PLM, ERP, and where all? And then I think that you have to look at like, well, what's the core tenet of what that solution was trying to provide, and if you need that core tenet, then that maybe it's worth buying that thing, and then. If it's not modular and they have features that you don't need, you don't have to use them. It just sometimes feels wasteful. I know I get the same feeling when I talk to people. But then you also get into the whole overwhelm of like, should I be reevaluating what I am using to see if I should use this? And can I save money? And can I consolidate?
Yeah.
And those are all good questions, and they all make a lot of sense. It's just that you just want to make sure. I think what my experience has been is you just don't want to get distracted by the weeds, right? Like, like if you have something that's working for you and you need this other thing, then get the other thing that solves that problem, and solves that problem the best it can possibly do, and that it can. And then if it happens to have overlap, then you have another project that you then look at to then see if you can consolidate that overlap, or if it makes sense to even bother. Maybe the thing you have works fine, and just realize once again, it's not a big bang. Just like anything else, big bang implementation or big bang thing, you can make incremental improvements on these things all the time. And having a little bit of overlap isn't that big of a deal. It just feels weird and just feels like confusing. But so sources like us, where we're telling you like where it makes sense to use this and kind of how people use it, should be helpful to you to kind of figure out, do I need that? And am I doing high, low mix, high volume, high mix, low volume? What am I doing? And then what does it make sense for me to have these tools? And is that the bottleneck in my organization at this time that I need to solve?
So, I mean, we're in the integration space, right? That's what we're focused on, providing quality, configurable, but scalable and pre-built integrations between the systems we work with. Where does integration fit with PLM?
Yeah, I think that integration is a hard problem, right? I mean, so what a lot of these systems do is I think there's a little bit of competition between like your ERP world and the PLM world and the CAD world, and they're all trying to be, an essential component, right? Which is, if you're in business for software, you want to be an essential component, and you want to be if you're the source of truth, then you're always going to be there, right? And that's why everybody, you see the marketing, it's like, we're the source of truth. Everybody's agreeing on trying to debate about that, because whoever can be the most essential will stay, and it will be kept, and everything is not essential maybe discarded. So that's where the truth really lies, is that the source of truth, like I mentioned earlier, depends what truth you're talking about, and it may be best served in different places. And if that's true, then how do you make sure, because all these different systems it's really easy to build a product where it works within your system. Like as soon as you cross the border into another system, then it's out of your control as a software company. So most software companies are like, well, we're going to control everything what we do. So we're going to have our standalone system to do quality, or we're going to build a bunch of add-on systems together, like an ERP or a PLM, that have a bunch of features that are vertically integrated, so they all work together. But rarely do all those modules, like I mentioned earlier, typically solve the problem exactly, and doesn't have all the feature sets people want. So people typically have an array of products, right, that they use. And in the engineering space, some people will have CAD, they'll have PLM, and they'll have PDM, and they'll have ERP. So we act as that to try to make it so the data flow between these systems is pretty seamless, so you can use each system for their best core competency, what they do best, and that the data between the two is flowing in a way that is natural, that makes sense for how you're doing it. So to go back to the example before, it's like, well, the source of truth for the engineering design is in CAD. If I change, I'm not going to go into ERP and change the way the design works. Right. Even though the source of truth for how that engineered thing is made, the routing maybe or something like that, is the source of truth is the ERP in that case. So I would change the routing, but it doesn't change the form, fit, or function of the design. If I'm changing the form, fit, or function of the design, then I need to go back to the CAD. Right. And then float. So then, and then so on and so forth for the different areas. So our job is to make that flow of data between these two systems so it can derive. So the derivations happen along the way, is to make the flow be very, very easy. And that's the world that we sit in, is to do that integration. So that way you can kind of, once again, get back to use the best of the breed for the purpose that you're using it for, but not have to suffer for the fact that the data isn't match, or the data isn't flowing from one system to the other. And I was careful about saying the data matches, because it's more like a derivative than it is like a copy. I think that's one of the things people realize is the engineering design, it does transfer to a PLM, and then it does transfer to an ERP, but it's changing. It's a derivative at every step, right? Not a copy. So it's that's why we use the term transformations internally. We transform the data. We don't link it or tie it together. It's like it transforms from one thing to the next. because otherwise, why would you? I mean, one of the tenets of software development is don't repeat yourself. Why would you have the same data in multiple places?
Right.
Unless there was a reason for it, which is because it's not exactly the same data; it's a derivative.
It's a derivative. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it might be a bit of a hot topic, right? Which is of that data, right? It's like it should be the same. I mean, I've had that conversation myself. Like, it should be the same data. Data shouldn't change, right? Or it should be the same everywhere. And to your point, if it was the same everywhere, then it would kind of negates what you're saying. I think I understood is like it negates kind of the purpose of different systems, right? Like you're deriving, you're adding on to, or you're modifying in some way that data into the new system. Maybe it's being expanded, or there's additional data being attached to it that, but it is being expanded or a derivative, as you said.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing is that you're talking kind of apples and oranges too. It's like, I mean, the common one you always hear about is like description. The description should be the same everywhere, right? The description of this part, right? Which, everybody agrees with. It's like, it's a bolt, it's a bracket with a bolt, hole pattern or whatever the description is, right? So, and everybody's like, well, the description here, here, and here, the PLM and the ERP, they all should match. They're exactly right. And I'd say, well, true. I mean, absolutely, that doesn't it makes complete sense. Right? That with the part number, obviously, that would have to match because that's the key that we link everything together with. But like let's go with description. Like, well, is the description? They're different data systems, right? So maybe like just using a simple example, maybe the description field in like the CAD is infinite, but when it gets to the ERP, it's 40 characters long. All right. So, and then you have an additional notes field in the ERP that's, that takes on the extra part of the description. The description technically is the same, but they're not tied together. You have to derive that. Just a simple example of a transformation. I have to take that one description that's in CAD and transform it into two different fields in the ERP. So are they the same? Well, not technically. They're spread across. They're not digitally. I mean, they're not from a data structure standpoint exactly the same. But does that make sense? So that's where I think the definition of same is also sometimes in question. It's like, and that's why we don't talk about like just linking or tying it together, because that's where it kind of falls apart, because they're not the same system. So like trying to make them mirror is kind of almost a false thought to start with. Yeah.
Right. So where does CADTALK fit from an integration standpoint? Like, do we integrate with? I mean, because we integrate CAD with PLM. Do we integrate with ERP? Like, where do we fit?
I think both. I mean, if you think about there being a pipeline of systems, right? You'd have CAD and a PDM, PLM, ERP. That's kind of the pipeline. Some people don't have PDM; they go CAD directly to PLM, because PLM and PDM sometimes have overlap, as I mentioned before. And then sometimes people don't have ERP and they just have PLM. If they don't do any manufacturing, they may have PLM. So we typically sit between CAD and PDM and ERP and PLM. So we would do the integration usually between a CAD to PLM or PLM or PDM to PLM, or from PLM to ERP. There's the areas that we sit, and that's typically so we have tools that work inside of the CAD that extracts bill of material and information to load the PLMs. And then we also have tools that will read data from PDMs if that data has been augmented into PDM beyond the CAD to do the same thing. And then then there's additional data added on at the PLM stage that we can then use to populate the ERP to then do a further derivation of what's needed to happen around the manufacturing. So those are the areas that we typically sit.
What PLMs are out there? Do you know about?
Probably the one we work with a lot is obviously Arena, which is the Arena PLM. There's Innovia, which is a large product from Dassault. I think Windchill has a PLM. I think Windchill's a PLM, like depending on what level you buy. I'm trying to think.
The ones that I know is that Windchill. Some PLMs are also PDMs, right? They're kind of they're document management too. So what I always see these days is like I see the large PDM systems that are PDM PLM systems from the large publishers like your Dassault, who has Innovia, the 3D Experience platform. You have PTC, but PTC has the classic Windchill, which is a large PLM, often used in aerospace and defense. Very common there, and a lot of complex machinery. I also see Siemens Team Center, of course,
Absolutely.
another, see that in consumer electronics, but also large, complex. And then, of course, like you mentioned, Arena, which is also owned by PTC, is a cloud-based PLM. I've seen a lot of more cloud-based PLMs as well. So there are a lot more, like there are cloud-based ERPs, a lot more cloud-based PLMs that are out there as well, which typically don't always have PDM systems, but do have integrations with PDM systems and allow a bunch of people from the organization to have one place to work, that cloud-based PLM. So there are lots of different PLMs out there. Most of the market, I think, is represented by the largest CAD players, right? Because CAD and PDM and PLM kind of go together. So those CAD, originally CAD publishers, like I said, Dassault and PTC and Siemens, and Autodesk. Yeah, Autodesk. They all have their own PLM system, sometimes more than one PLM system. And then, of course, there are then those more, let's say, newer PLM systems that are all cloud-based, right? Arena is one of those, as well as there's a number of others I know out there. Like there's a Propel and a Duro and several other Open Bomb, I think, other PLMs that are out there that I've seen that are cloud-based. And so all kinds of different PLMs out there, depending upon the type of organization that you are, right?
Yep.
What I typically see is much larger. So like, Boeing, or even like we work with a race car company that makes Formula One racing. They use a PLM, right? They're managing that. Whereas some large other companies we work with, aerospace and defense, use a PLM, right? They use like a PTC Windchill or a Siemens Team Center, and so those have integrations with ERP. But those are the ones that at least I see when I talk to people in the market, customers at trade shows or those sorts of things, right? They have those types of systems. It all depends upon the size and the goals of the company, how big of a PLM that they have, and how well the PLM is in that industry, how well it works in that industry.
You also see the ERP players making PLMs as well. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
you
starting
do.
to it's like, I think if you think about the spectrum of products that go to manufacturing companies, and you have the engineering software publishers like your Autodesk, your Dassaults, and then you have and then you have your ERP side, the manufacturing part of that spectrum. The ERP players like your SAPs, Oracles, Infor, and then they have their different sides of it that they're doing, and then there's a middle in between, and they're both trying to get into that middle, right? They're both
Right.
trying to get into that space and try to provide value when they can, right? So
That's it.
and there's advantage and disadvantages to which ones you go with, because like typically if you're an ERP player and you're creating it, the integration to that ERP will be better, but typically the CAD part of it or the engineering part of it will be a little weaker. If you start from the engineering side, the integration to the CAD and things like that can tend to be, not always, tend to be stronger, but the integration to the ERP will be weaker. So it just depends on, because remember, these people are kind of working in their own domains and creating extensions to their things, and to try to create extensions, and have those things work with everything that's out in the market is difficult. So they
It
tend to
is.
work really well with their own things really well. They tend to work
The,
really well with their own stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I see even some, exactly. I even see some PLM partners, PLM companies want to have their own ERP, right? And some
Mm-hmm.
ERP comes with their own PLM. And so this idea that you'll be able to have everything in your system, right? Everybody will be able to use your system for everything, but that's not, like you said, it's not a core competency of that system, right? It's hard to be everything to all people.
Yep.
Especially when other companies, other publishers have been doing it for years and years and years, and have really honed that system, built it up over that long period of time. So what I always see,
Especially in niche markets, like if you like, it's really hard to beat somebody who built a thing just for the thing that you're trying to do, right? It's
it
really,
is.
I mean, if you have a niche market, it's like, is it better to have the niche tool integrated together, or is it better to buy a general tool that kind of works together, but doesn't really quite do what you want it to do? I mean, these are
Right.
decisions of business, right? I mean, it's just like you have to decide on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. That is a business decision. Do you want to buy that universal system that does everything you want, like the everything app, but does some of those things not as strongly as it could, or as strongly as the leader, and that's in that niche, Or do you buy all the best software of that, what you're trying to accomplish, that niche, and then have it tied and integrated together intelligently, right? And that's where CADTALK fits. I
Yeah.
think it's, that's where we're looking to do. I think we threw our hat in already because we want to tie the systems together. There's no need for CADTALK if you buy the system that has everything and it all works, quote unquote, works together, but is not the core or the rock solid product of that particular publisher.
Exactly. Yeah, these are the different. I think that's where it causes a lot of confusion. People don't know. That's because ultimately things go back to a business decision that's really very dependent upon how you want to run your business and the problems that you have and you're trying to solve. So it's like people can advise you. They can give you. That's why you have to give people frameworks or principles in which to work by instead of, well, you should do this or you should do that. It's more like, this is how these things work, and these are the principles that you could use to which to derive your own decision, because you have all the context. When you work at that company and you have that problem, you have all the context. So really just if you have the principles in which to make the decision, you can make the best decision, as opposed to somebody who doesn't understand your context giving you advice exactly what you should do.
Yeah. So it sounds like, your advice in this situation is really to kind of go back to the person who's asking for the advice and say, hey, use this framework, right? What's your business's goal? What are your business's goals? How do you guys, what's important to you, right? Is it important to you to have everything on one? Is it important to you to have the best tool? Well, what's important to you, and make the decision accordingly. It's not our job to tell you what the best thing is to do, like use this or that, right? To recommend one thing or another. That's not the business we're in. But, our job is to say, help with the framework of think through the process. And then, of course, if you decide to have things that need to be integrated, then we can help fit that need. We can help provide that value, but also do it in the best way possible. But again, it's like not our job to tell you, hey, or do this or do that or fire in your shoes. It's like, well, there's so many factors. What does your business need? What's the problems you're trying to solve? What's unique to you? And they have to make a decision accordingly. Not the answer people want to have, right? Because the easy button. I want the easy button. What should I do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I always go back to, like, I think it was Hormozy talked about this idea of a Solomon paradox of, like, is that, like, King Solomon was, like, really good at giving advice, but he was really horrible at following it. So he was like, his life was in shambles and all this kind of stuff because he'd always, I think because he seek counsel with other people or something like that. And it's always like he gave really good advice. And actually, if you think about it, like, who better to give you advice? A lot of times people give better advice than they actually give themselves.
Right.
And you think about it, like, who's better to give you advice than your future self or somebody, or even yourself, because you actually have all of the context from which to make
information.
So, what, like, I think he does this. It's kind of interesting. He actually does a chat with himself, like his 80-year-old self, and basically puts on, like, a different thinking hat in order to have that chat to then say, because think about it, if you get advice from somebody, you spend majority of your time giving them context. So this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'm trying. This is what this is. I mean, like, all of this stuff, so they can then, with even imperfect information, give you advice. And where it's probably better to go, well, I know my problem. I know my context. How does this thing work? That way I can integrate that into my context in which to make the decision. So a lot of times you're probably the best at giving yourself that advice. You just need more. You just need to understand more of the tool so you can add that to your context.
That's a good framework, good frame for thinking, especially in the industry with all these different products and different tools you can use, and sometimes it can be hard to make a decision and hard to find the right answers. But kind of saying, you have all the best context. You can learn how everything works, and hopefully this podcast helps understand PLM and kind of at least an introduction to PLM and its strengths and what it does. But ultimately, you have to incorporate that into your context and see if that makes the best fit.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Scott, man, this was an interesting conversation. I didn't think that PLM would. I don't know where it would go, but this was a good conversation. Nice to know that I think it's fair to say that PLM is newer to us than, say, CAD systems are, right? Just because of the nature of where we started, but of course now PLM is one of the major alphabet acronyms in our space that we talk about every day, we use every day. We integrate every day. And so good conversation, Scott. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Any last words?
No, I think it's really cool to double click and deep dive on these concepts, because I mean they really crystallize your thinking around them, and I think this episode's gonna be really helpful for people who are confused by these things and what they are. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of complexity around the terms, especially especially acronyms. I think I've ever seen Elon talk about how he hated acronyms because it just makes things seem more daunting than they actually are. Yeah. And when you really think about it, they're just systems that store data, and that's in order to help you with the process. So if you always go back to kind of first principles and think about that, then they seem less daunting and more approachable. So.
Yeah, vocabulary. That's one of the reasons we took on this sort of alphabet series. Is because there's so many acronyms and so hard to follow along. You're speaking to someone and it's like, well, what did you just say there?
Mm-hmm. Just complexity to make it sound like it's more than it is a lot of times.
Yeah. Essentially, it's simple concept. Well, great. So thanks everybody for listening in to this episode of the Integrate Intelligently podcast, episode 9. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Again, Scott, it was great to see you again, have this conversation. We'll see you next week.